Hey, peace y'all, this your brother 93. Just wanted to do another quick video on color arguments for Jews, since there's been a lot of that going around on YouTube. I want to do a different kind of style, go through the centuries, maybe from the 1600s to 17th century on down to at least the 20th century, and show some depictions and descriptions of Jews. So the first person to note is Baruch Spinoza, or Benedict Spinoza. This source is The Life of Benedict de Spinoza by Johannes Colerus, 1706. Page 39 describes him. It says, he was of a middle size, he had good features in his face, the skin somewhat black, black curled hair, long eyebrows, and of the same color, so that one might easily know by his looks that he was descended from Portuguese Jews. Notice the text doesn't explicitly call him a Negro or anything like a literal African, because in Amsterdam, the Sephardic Jews owned slaves, and they definitely knew of Africans from their contact with them in Portugal and from the slave trade that was going on. So what do they mean when they call him somewhat black? Is that connected to the swarthy or quote-unquote dark complexion of the Jew? And does this continue with Jews down the line from century to century? Now, we read in the source that comes after his death that his skin was somewhat black. And they described the Sephardic Jews as being definitely dark. And during his lifetime, we actually see what he looked like. So during his lifetime, Spinoza was painted on the left by Franz Wulfhagen in 1666. Spinoza died in 1677. So during his lifetime, he was not depicted as a real, actual black Negro person. He was described as black because they were calling Sephardic Jews dark or whatever. And on the right, you have an unknown artist from 1665. What's interesting is the Sephardic Jews actually owned black slaves, and they knew about actual black people, so it would be no problem for them to actually describe him as a Negro, because in Amsterdam they actually had Negro Africans there. He's not described as a Negro, but they do say his skin is somewhat black. So make of it what you will, but during his lifetime he was not depicted as an actual black person. This source is The Worthies of Cumberland by John Dalton. The Worthies of Cumberland, John Dalton by Henry Lonsdale, 1874, page 178. Now, later down the line, it seems that they actually got a better translation or a better description of Spinoza, right? So it says, attention should be drawn to Spinoza, that swarthy, olive complexion Jew of penetrating eye and long black hair, right? Now here's a very good one, right? By Clement Eaton, who I think he died the same year as Spinoza. He's a contemporary of Spinoza. He created this portrait of him 5 years before they both died. So take a close look at this image. It is by Clement Eaton. He died the same year as Spinoza. The source is the Miriam and Ira D. Wallach Division of Art. And this is from 1672 of Baruch Spinoza. Now, I know a lot of people who want to be critics and detractors of this sort of thing is going to appeal to conspiracy, but they would have to explain why would he be depicted as a non-African, non-literal Negro, or non-literal black kind of person that they had enslaved in Amsterdam at the time. Why would they do that during his lifetime? They would have to explain that, and they would also have to produce from an accredited place like a museum or art gallery or archive these quote-unquote pictures of him being a literal Negro. What's funny is that we actually have images of the Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam during that time. Right here we have two Haggahs, right? The one on the right is the Herlingen Amsterdam Haggadah, and the one on the left is the N.L. Joshua of Woolett's Haggadah, right? Both of these are from the 18th century, the 1700s. The one on the right is from 1751, and I believe the one on the left is from 1769. And we see through these brief images the type of depictions of the Jews of Amsterdam, what they look like. And here is an interesting article that you all should look for. African blacks and mulattoes in 17th century Amsterdam, shows the Portuguese Jews and how they dealt with actual African black people and how they held them as slaves. This is written by a black Sephardic Jew, Johannes Elazar Demota. He also has a YouTube channel where he talks about a lot of this stuff. And here we have Manasseh ben Israel. He was a Portuguese Jew in Amsterdam, right? And on the right, that's an engravement portrait by Salom, Italia, 1642, during his lifetime, right? And here's his Wikipedia entry where you guys can look him up. His picture was taken during his lifetime. He was a Portuguese Jew that was active in Amsterdam. The Sephardic Jews left Iberia, and many of them found refuge in Amsterdam. And he descends from that sort of Sephardic Jew. And in this source right here, the Glasgow Mechanics Magazine, Annals of Philosophy, Volume 4 from 1825, we have a quote from Manasseh. Quite interesting quote. Let's go to it. And we go to page 42 and we read the quote attributed to Manasseh. He says, "We live not amongst the blackamoors and wild men, but amongst the white and civilized people of the world. Yet we find this an ordinary course, that men are very prone to hate and despise him that have ill fortune, and on the other side to make much of those whom fortune doth favor." So it's interesting that he speaks about not living amongst blackamoors, but so many people think that these Portuguese Jews, even ones like Spinoza and Manasseh, who was the same stock and also lives in Amsterdam just like Spinoza, you know, they assume that these people are literally black. But we see the attitude of some of these people. I also showed the article where Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam owned black slaves, and here's just one of the examples of their attitudes about blacks. Here's a portrait of a young Jew, courtesy of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. This is done by Rembrandt, who was a Dutch artist, renowned artist, active in Amsterdam and in that region. He drew a lot of Sephardic Jews, this being one of them. And finally, regarding the Jews of Amsterdam, I wanted to show one last text that just shows some images contemporary to this time. Text features Amsterdam Portuguese Jews, Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam. And this book is The Religious Ceremonies and Customs of the Several Nations of the Known World, The Ceremonies of the Jews, 1731. So we're going to go in this book and look at a few images. So we're here on page 192, and it talks about the dedication or consecration of the synagogue, right? And it says, "This description shall be that of the dedication of the synagogue of the Portuguese Jews at Amsterdam," right? They talk about it, and they're going to show it, right? So here's an image. I'm going to say it in English. The dedication of the synagogue of the Portuguese Jews. Juifs, Portugal, right? And let's see. Well, if these are Portuguese Jews, for the most part, you can look at them and take away what you will, what kind of people they are. I don't really see Africans here. I don't really see phenotypically black people here, right? And this is a book contemporary to the time period and the location where Spinoza would have came from, right? Let's see. De Juifs Portuguese at Amsterdam, right? Dedication to the Jews, right? So we see what they look like in Amsterdam. And I'm not saying this is like the end-all be-all, but when we look at research relevant to the time and we see the location and the community that they come from, right, then we can pretty much come to the conclusion that we come to. For the 19th century, which is the 1800s, we got Judah P. Benjamín, American politician, right? He was born 1811 to 1884, right? And he is Jew. He's of Jewish descent. Here he is. This is what he looks like, right? Quick Wikipedia little overview for him, right? He was a senator from Louisiana, right? First Jew to hold a cabinet in North America. He was born to Sephardic Jewish parents from London, right? So let's look at how he's described, right? A former classmate, W.W. Hoppin, recalled Benjamin's early days at Yale in 1884. He was a small, bright-eyed boy of a dark and swarthy complexion, evidently of Jewish blood. Right? So here's that thing again with them being called swarthy, right? Sephardic Jews in particular. And this is 1884 that he's recounting what happened when they were at Yale, right? And this text is Judah P. Benjamin, the Jewish Confederate by Ellie N. Evans, right? It's another source, right, talking about him, right? Benjamin was low in stature, swarthy in complexion, and decidedly Hebraic in appearance. And his enemies called him the ever-smiling Jew, right? So here he is again being called swarthy, and his features so Jewish, right, in description. This is The History of the Southern Confederacy by Clement Eaton, 1965, and here's one more, right? Judah P. Benjamin of Louisiana, practitioner in the various law courts of London, handsome Jewish face, liquid tones, right? His swarthy complexion, black flashing eyes, and Frenchified dress and speech made him one of the attractions of the Senate, right? This is page 57 here. Anecdotes of Public Men, Volume 1 by John Forney, 1873. And right here at the tail end of the 19th century, we have a source from 1888 by Charles Henry Fox, The Art of Making Up for Public and Private Theatricals. It's interesting because it talks about another population or other populations of Jews being called dark. And when we go to the chapter on the Jews, it says, you know, the typical. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. But if you go right under it, it says, the typical Jew is, however, generally made up dark. That's interesting. As we go into the 20th century, we'll see this extended to other populations of Jews. Here's another source from the 19th century, from 1895, Annual Report of the Surgeon General, page 143. And I thought this was interesting because it talked about Jews immigrating to the United States at the end of the 1900s, and it doesn't even specify what kind of Jews or necessarily where exactly they come from. They come from Europe, but it doesn't talk about a group. And it says, most of these foreigners are Jews. They are a dark and swarthy race with long black unkempt hair. And this is people willingly immigrating in the late 1800s, and we already seen, you know, non-black people be called dark, swarthy, and this continues throughout the centuries. So you can just imagine what kind of European Jewish people these are immigrating to the United States. I just thought it was interesting to add since we're going down the line. So here's the source here. Y'all can go find it. Page 193. This next one is kind of funny. This is a comment from a Hebrew Israelite brother. I took his name out of the comment. It was on a video, and it was interesting that he quoted this source, both at the top and the bottom right here on the screen. I split it up. It says, almost 70 years later, in 1920, Franz Kafka writes to Melina Jacinka that, and here's the quote, naturally, for your father, there's no difference between your Jewish husband and myself. There's no doubt about it. To the European, we both have the same Negro face. And I guess this is supposed to prove that Jews are Negro or black. Yeah, it's interesting because this population is actually not even Sephardic. And the source that's quoted is Gilman, 1993, right? But the article that he cherry-picked this from is actually refuting or, you know, kind of going against this position. It's just listing the sources. But the brother cherry-picked it and used it as if it was making his case. But after doing some research, I found this kind of funny to see who they were talking about and who they were actually saying has a quote-unquote Negro face. So remember, according to this source, there's a woman named Melina Jacinka, and there's a man named Franz Kafka who was talking about him and her husband, saying there's no difference between her husband and him, and to Europeans they both have the same Negro face, and they're Jews. So let's look into that source. And I kid you not, that comment is directly quoting this article that is actually combating the position that they were making in that comment section. And they're quoting this article as if they didn't read it, they just took what they wanted to take, which was, it's very hilarious. Down here, do you see exactly what he quoted? He even got the quote of the article where it says, you know, it has Gilman right here, right? And he has this part, this whole part right here, right? When I screenshotted it, I split his comments into two, but this is exactly where it comes from this article. And he leaves this part out, right? Or he didn't read it. He kind of just took this part up here that he could use to kind of spring on people, and then he didn't read the part of the article where the guy like really explains. But it doesn't matter anyway, because we can actually take a look at the people that he's describing. And so here is Melina, right? The one who the letter is written to. She's married, right? Her husband is compared to the other guy, said to be Negro Jewish, or what the quote was, comparing them to actual Negroes or black people. This is the young lady who was married, right? And she was married to Ernst Polak. This is him right here, right? Ex-husband of Melina, right here, right? And we look at a little quick Wikipedia entry on him. He was the son of bilingual Jewish gemstone merchant and his German wife, and he spoke German with his mother and Czech with his father. So he's like a German Czech kind of Jew, right? And here he is. They're comparing him and the other gentleman, saying that they have you know, Negroid features, or comparing them to black people in some way, shape, or form. Take a good look at him. That's Ernst Polak. And here is the man who wrote the letter, who compared himself to the previous guy. His name is Franz Kafka. He was born in Prague, Czech Republic. He was a Jewish middle-class doctor of law. Died of tuberculosis at the age of 40. So this is the man who compared himself and her husband as having a Negro face. And this is a European, obviously, quote-unquote, white, non-black Jewish man. Very interesting. And here's a couple more images of him, just so you can get a look at him. Yep. Very interesting. And this is a source from the 20th century. Yep. But considering that even Hitler, as detailed here in Hybrid Hate, this is Tudor Parfitt's book, this is the beginning page of that book, it quotes Hitler, even he continued the notion of non-black Jews being called such or likened to black people. You know, he called them Negroid parasites, and we know his history with the actual European Jews in Poland and Germany and so forth. So makes sense for the time, but you have people who literally think this is black people that's being spoken about. So just to recap, this source right here was posted. I don't know what they were trying to prove, or if they were actually really doing the research, but it seems cherry-picked. But the source just talks about Franz Kafka writing to a woman and basically comparing him and her husband, and saying basically to Europeans they both have the Negro face. But looking here upon investigation, it seems to be another case of Jews just compared to black people in a negative sense, not necessarily literal. And these are Czech and German Jews. Very interesting. So that concludes the video pretty much. We showed claims and evidence of Jews being called black or dark from pretty much the 18th century to the 20th century. And it also marks the penultimate part of my videos on the Portuguese or Sephardic Jews. Yeah, I'm pretty much exhausted talking about them. Been doing it for over a year now. Haven't really had too many meaningful discussions, no real debates on the topic matter. I do know people will continue to put out misinformation, but hopefully people who watch these videos and watch these sources that were cited can find some value and can have some pushback against those claims. We're going to always have people who recycle misinformation, unfortunately, but I would advise everybody who have these discussions, don't let them get to you. Don't stress yourself out. I certainly don't plan to dedicate my life to forever talking about this topic with people who really don't want to receive the information. But I appreciate everybody who's watched. I believe I have one more video, a small video on the topic, or maybe a live video that I want to have a discussion. If not, I'll just drop the last small video on my position on the Portuguese Jews. And for the people who've watched these few videos on my channel, I want to say thank you so much, and I appreciate you very much. Thank you. Peace.